Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something darker than your browser history and deadlier than your aunt's potato salad. The Black Plague. Not the sanitized version from history class. Not the ring around the rosy nursery rhyme nonsense. I'm talking about the actual, horrifying, body-piling, rat-infested nightmare that wiped out a third of Europe faster than you can say, wash your hands. This is 1347, and everything, and I mean everything, is about to go sideways. So before we descend into medieval hell, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy this kind of historically accurate suffering. Leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is for you. I'm guessing it's either 2 a.m. or you're pretending to work. Either way, I respect it. Now, dim those lights, switch on a fan for that soft white noise, get comfortable, and maybe pull the covers up, because this one's going to make you grateful for literally everything you have. Let's pause for a second. Have you ever wondered what it was actually like to survive the Black Death? How did people not lose their minds watching their neighbours drop like flies? What did you do when the doctor showed up dressed like a demented bird? Did medieval people understand germs, or were they just vibing with death? How do you go grocery shopping when half the town is dead? What's the protocol when your roommate starts coughing? And most importantly, could you survive even a week in plague-era Europe without modern medicine, soap, or the faintest clue about bacteria? And now, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1347. It's October. You're in a cramped house that smells like unwashed bodies and desperation. Your neighbour just died yesterday. There's a weird lump forming under your arm. And somewhere in the distance, you hear a cart rolling through the street with someone shouting, "Bring out your dead." Good luck. You wake up to silence, which is wrong. Medieval towns are never quiet. There's always someone shouting, a rooster screaming its little head off, or a cart rattling by. But today, nothing. You sit up on your straw mattress, and that's when you hear it. The plague cart. The wheels creak. A bell rings. Someone's voice echoes flatly. "Bring out your dead." You look around your tiny home. Your brother isn't moving. Your mother's breathing sounds wet. And you've got a headache that feels like your skull is trying to escape your face. Let's set the scene properly. You're sleeping in what can generously be called a bed. It's really just a wooden frame with some straw thrown on top, covered with a rough wool blanket that's seen better decades. You share this bed with at least 2 other people because privacy is a concept that won't be invented for another few hundred years. Your entire family lives in one room. One room. There's a fire pit in the centre, a table, maybe a stool if you're fancy, and that's it. The walls are wattle and daub, basically sticks and mud, and they do almost nothing to keep out the cold, the smell, or the reality of what's happening outside. The first thing you notice when you open your eyes is that your younger brother, who usually kicks you in his sleep, hasn't moved at all. He's lying there, face pale, lips slightly blue, eyes half open. You nudge him. Nothing. You nudge him harder. Still nothing. And that's when the dread starts creeping in, like cold water filling your chest. Because you've seen this before. 3 times in the last week. First your neighbour, then your uncle, then the baker's entire family. Now it's in your house. Your mother is awake, sitting by the fire, but she's not doing anything. She's just staring at the wall. Her breathing sounds wrong, like there's liquid where there shouldn't be. Like she's drowning from the inside. You want to ask if she's okay, but you already know the answer. Nobody's okay. Nobody's been okay for weeks. The question isn't, are you sick anymore? It's, how long until you're dead? You swing your legs off the bed, and that's when you feel it. Everything hurts. Not like, I slept wrong, hurts. Like, your bones are made of broken glass and your muscles are tearing themselves apart. Your head is pounding so hard you can hear your heartbeat in your ears. You're sweating, but you're also freezing. You reach up to wipe your forehead, and your hand comes away soaked. This is how it starts. This is how everyone says it starts. Outside, that voice keeps calling, "Bring out your dead. Bring out your dead." It's mechanical, bored almost. Like he's taking drink orders, except the order is corpses. The plague cart makes its rounds every morning now, and every morning there are more bodies. You've seen them stacked in the cart like firewood arms hanging over the sides, heads lolling, faces frozen in whatever expression they died with. Sometimes there are so many that they fall off, and the cart driver just sighs and tosses them back on like he's picking up dropped groceries. You stumble to the door and crack it open. The street is empty, except for the cart, and you can smell it before you see it. Death has a very specific smell, sweet and rotten and wrong. It gets into your nose, your throat, your clothes. You can't wash it out because nobody's washing anything anymore. The public bathhouse closed 2 weeks ago. The well in the centre of town has a dead dog floating in it, and nobody's bothered to fish it out. Hygiene isn't just bad, it's effectively non-existent. The cart driver is wearing a cloth wrapped around his face, which does absolutely nothing but make him look like a bandit. He sees you and calls out, "Any dead?" You want to say no. You want to slam the door and pretend everything's fine. But you look back at your brother's body, still and cold, and you know you can't keep him in the house. The smell will get worse. The disease might spread though, let's be honest. If you're in the same house, you've already been exposed. Still, there's protocol. There's the pretense that society still functions. One, you call back, your voice cracking. The driver nods and starts pulling the cart closer. You go back inside and try to figure out how you're going to move your brother. He's not heavy, nobody's heavy anymore because food's been scarce, but he's dead weight, literally, and you're weak. Your mother doesn't help. She just keeps staring at the wall, breathing that terrible wet breathing. You grab your brother under the arms and drag him toward the door. His head lolls back. His mouth hangs open. Yesterday he was complaining about being hungry. Now he's a corpse. The cart driver helps you hoist the body up, and it lands with a thud on top of 3 other bodies you recognize. There's Margaret from 2 houses down. There's the butcher's son. There's someone you don't recognize, which is saying something because you know everyone in this village. Knew everyone. Past tense. The driver makes a mark on a piece of parchment he's keeping count, though you're not sure why. Maybe the church wants to know. Maybe the Lord wants to know how many workers he's lost. Maybe someone's just morbidly curious. "Anyone else?" the driver asks. You glance back at your mother. "Not yet, but soon." "Not yet," you say. He nods again and starts pulling the cart down the street. The wheels creak. The bell rings. "Bring out your dead," he calls, and someone else opens their door. You close yours and lean against it. Your head is swimming. Your vision blurs at the edges. You touch your neck, and there's a lump there that wasn't there yesterday. Small, tender, growing. You know what it is. Everyone knows what it is. You've got maybe a week, maybe less, and there's nothing you can do about it except wait for your turn on the cart. Your mother coughs a deep, wet, rattling cough and doesn't stop for a full minute. When she finally catches her breath, she looks at you with eyes that are already somewhere else. Somewhere past this room, past this life. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't need to. This is the morning you realize everyone's dying, including you. It's not dramatic. It's not sudden. It's just the slow, suffocating certainty that the world is ending one body at a time, and you're watching it happen from the inside. The worst part isn't the fear, it's the resignation, the acceptance that this is just how things are now. You'll die. Your mother will die. The cart will come. Someone will drag your body out. And life, what's left of it, will go on without you. Welcome to 1347. Try not to cough. Here's the thing. Nobody in 1347 has any idea what's killing them. Germ theory won't be a thing for another 500 years. So what do people blame? Everything. Bad air, alignment of planets, God's wrath, Jewish people, tragically, cats, stupidly, some guy in the next village who looked at you funny. The popular theory is miasma, basically, stinky air. So the solution? Don't breathe near bad smells, which is hilarious, because everything in medieval Europe smells like a crime scene. Let's break down the medieval understanding of disease, which is to say, let's break down a complete and utter failure of logic. The dominant medical theory of the time is based on the works of Galen and Hippocrates, ancient Greek physicians who thought the human body was governed by 4 humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. When these humours are balanced, you're healthy. When they're out of whack, you're sick. Simple, right? Except it's completely wrong, and it's about to get a lot of people killed. So when the plague shows up and starts dropping bodies faster than anyone can count, the medical establishment scrambles for an explanation. The University of Paris, the Harvard of medieval Europe, is consulted. These are the best minds of the age, the brightest scholars, the most learned physicians, and their official conclusion, delivered in 1348, is that the plague was caused by a conjunction of 3 planets, Saturn, Jupiter, and Mars, in the sign of Aquarius on the 20th of March, 1345. This cosmic event, they explain, corrupted the air and created a deadly miasma that spread across Europe. Let that sink in. The planets did it. Not bacteria, not fleas, not rats. The planets looked at each other wrong, and now 1/3 of Europe is dying. It's astrology as epidemiology, and it's the official medical position. But wait, it gets better, because while scholars are blaming the cosmos, regular people are getting creative with their own theories. Some blame earthquakes for releasing poisonous fumes from the Earth's core. Others point to comets or eclipses. A few decide it's divine punishment for humanity's sins: too much dancing, too much drinking, too much fun. God got fed up and sent a plague to straighten everyone out. It's like blaming your hangover on moral failure instead of the 12 beers you drank, except the hangover is death, and it's happening to everyone you know. The miasma theory is particularly popular because it seems to make sense. Dead bodies smell bad. Sick people smell bad. Therefore, bad smells must cause disease. The logic is airtight if you ignore literally everything about how disease actually works. So what's the medieval solution? Carry flowers, burn incense, hold a pomander filled with herbs under your nose, walk around smelling like a Bath and Body Works exploded on you. Does it work? Of course not. Does it make people feel like they're doing something? Absolutely. Doctors recommend avoiding corrupt air by staying away from swamps, sewers, and dead bodies, which, to be fair, isn't terrible advice, even if it's for the wrong reasons. They also suggest purifying the air in your home by burning fragrant woods like juniper and pine. Some people go further and burn sulfur, which doesn't prevent plague, but does make your house smell like hell. Literally, it's what demons would use for aromatherapy. Then there's bloodletting, the medieval cure-all that somehow makes everything worse. The theory is that bad blood needs to be drained out to restore balance to the humours. So doctors slice open your veins and let you bleed into a bowl while you're already dying from plague. It's like trying to fix a flat tyre by slashing the other 3. Sure, you're doing something, but you're definitely not helping. Some physicians recommend laxatives and emetics. Basically make yourself vomit and defecate simultaneously to purge the body of corrupted humours. Because when you're fighting a deadly bacterial infection, what you really need is severe dehydration and electrolyte imbalance. It's medical advice designed by someone who's never heard of medical advice. And then there are the truly insane remedies. Drink a glass of your own urine twice daily. Eat crushed emeralds mixed with gold if you're rich enough to afford it, which most people aren't. Apply a plaster made from human feces to the buboes. Yes, you read that right. The medical establishment is telling people to smear poop on their open sores. It's like they're actively trying to make things worse. Some people try to prevent infection by sitting between two large fires, sweating out the disease before it takes hold. Others drink mercury or arsenic in tiny amounts, reasoning that poison fights poison. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. It just adds mercury poisoning to your list of problems, which already includes plague, starvation, and existential dread. Animals aren't spared from the hysteria. Cats are blamed for spreading disease, probably because they're associated with witchcraft and general suspicious behaviour, so people start killing cats en masse. Which is ironic, because cats actually hunt the rats that carry the plague-infected fleas. By killing cats, people are essentially rolling out the welcome mat for the real culprits. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy of stupidity. The rat population explodes, the flea population explodes, and the plague spreads even faster. Congratulations, humanity, you played yourself. Dogs get killed too, though less enthusiastically. Birds are viewed with suspicion. Basically, if it moves and isn't human, someone thinks it's causing the plague, except rats. Nobody suspects rats. The actual disease vectors are just vibing, eating grain, and spreading death with complete impunity, while everyone's busy burning cats and sniffing flowers. Jewish communities face the most horrific blame. Across Europe, rumours spread that Jewish people are poisoning wells to cause the plague. It's completely baseless, utterly insane, and tragically believed by thousands. Despite the fact that Jewish communities are dying from plague at the same rates as everyone else, which should be proof enough that they're not behind it, mobs attack Jewish neighbourhoods, burn homes, and massacre entire populations. The Pope himself, Pope Clement VI, issues a papal bull in 1348 declaring that Jews are not responsible for the plague and Christians should stop killing them. The fact that the Pope has to explicitly say please stop murdering innocent people tells you everything you need to know about medieval crisis management. Here's what's actually happening, though nobody in 1347 knows it. The plague is caused by a bacterium called Yersinia pestis. It lives in fleas. The fleas live on rats. The rats live everywhere humans live, because humans in medieval Europe are, frankly, filthy. When an infected flea bites a rat and that rat dies, the flea looks for a new host. Sometimes that host is you. The flea bites you, injects bacteria into your bloodstream, and boom, you've got plague. It's not the planets. It's not bad air. It's not God's judgment. It's bacteria, fleas, and terrible sanitation practices. But nobody will figure this out until 1894, when Alexandra Yersin identifies the bacterium. That's 547 years of blaming everything except the actual cause. Imagine spending 5.5 centuries being catastrophically wrong about something that's killing millions of people. That's humanity for you. So while you're sitting in your medieval hovel, clutching your flowers and avoiding bad smells, the real enemy is already in your house. It's in your walls. It's in your grain stores. It's hitching a ride on every rat that scurries through your bedroom at night, and there's not a single thing you can do about it because you don't even know it exists. Sweet dreams. You might think a global pandemic would get you out of work. You'd be wrong. You're a peasant, which means you're legally tied to the land you work on. Your Lord doesn't care if you're feverish. He doesn't care if your lymph nodes are swelling like angry grapefruits. The crops still need harvesting. The pigs still need feeding. And if you don't show up, you're fined, or whipped, or both. It's like getting a Zoom meeting invite while you're actively coding in the hospital. Let's talk about the feudal system. which is essentially medieval capitalism, except worse because, at least under capitalism, you can theoretically quit your job. Under feudalism, you can't. You're a serf, which is a fancy word for person who belongs to the land. You don't own property. You don't have rights. You exist to work the Lord's estate, and in exchange, he provides protection, which mostly means protection from other lords who might want to exploit you instead. It's not slavery technically, but the difference is academic when you're not allowed to leave, and you owe your lord a percentage of everything you produce. Your typical workday starts before dawn. You wake up, if you can call it that, since you've barely slept on your straw mattress that's probably crawling with lice, and immediately get to work. If it's planting season, you're in the fields scattering seeds. If it's harvest season, you're bent over with a sickle, cutting grain until your back feels like it's going to snap. If it's winter, you're mucking out animal stalls, repairing tools, or doing whatever labour the Lord has decided needs doing. There are no weekends. There are no sick days. There's Sunday Mass, which is technically a day off, but you're required to attend, so it's more like mandatory team building. And now the plague shows up, and you think maybe, just maybe, the rules will bend a little. They don't. The Lord still expects his due. The crops don't care that half the village is dead. The animals still need tending. So even though you woke up this morning with a fever and a suspiciously swollen lump under your arm, you drag yourself out to the fields because the alternative is punishment. Here's what your Lord is thinking. Labour is a resource, and resources need to be extracted. Yes, people are dying at an alarming rate, but the people who aren't dead yet still owe him their labour. In fact, with fewer workers available, the remaining workers need to work harder to make up the shortfall. It's disaster capitalism, medieval style. The plague isn't a reason to lighten the load, it's a reason to crack down harder on the peasants who are still standing. Let's say you're too sick to work. You're feverish, delirious, barely able to stand. You send word to the bailiff, the Lord's enforcer, that you can't make it today. The bailiff shows up at your door, takes one look at you, and assesses a fine. Maybe it's a few pennies. Maybe it's a chicken. Maybe it's a portion of your grain stores. You don't have any of these things because you're dirt poor and also dying, but that's not the bailiff's problem. If you can't pay the fine, it gets added to your debt, which you'll owe when you recover, if you recover. If you don't, your family owes it. The system is airtight, or maybe the bailiff decides you're faking it. Plenty of peasants are trying to dodge work by claiming they're sick, he reasons, even though there's literal plague everywhere and people are dropping dead in the streets. He drags you out of bed and marches you to the fields, where you're expected to work a full day. You collapse after an hour. The bailiff tells you to get up. You can't. He fines you for that too. It's Kafkaesque, except Kafka won't be born for another 600 years. The lords are panicking, by the way. Not because they care about the peasants, let's be clear about that, but because their economic system is collapsing. Feudalism requires a large, stable labour force. When a third of that labour force dies, the whole thing starts to wobble. Fields go unplanted. Harvests rot in the ground. Animals starve because there's no one to feed them. The lords are watching their wealth evaporate, and their solution is to squeeze the remaining peasants even harder. It's the economic equivalent of trying to get more juice from an orange by crushing it into dust. Some lords try to forbid peasants from leaving their estates, worried that workers will flee to areas with fewer plague deaths or better conditions. They issue proclamations. Anyone caught trying to leave will be severely punished. It's martial law, except the enemy is bacteria and economic collapse. Peasants who do try to run are sometimes caught and brought back in chains. Sometimes they make it to another village, only to find the plague has beaten them there. Geography is no escape from a pandemic. Meanwhile, the church is still collecting tithes. You owe 10% of your produce to the church, plague or no plague. God's representatives on earth need funding, after all. Never mind that the local priest died last week and hasn't been replaced. Never mind that the church building is being used to store corpses because the cemetery is full. You still owe your tithe. Some priests try to waive the requirement, recognizing that demanding grain from starving, plague-ridden peasants is maybe not great optics. Other priests double down, insisting that failing to pay your tithe is a sin that will guarantee you a spot in hell which, given current circumstances, might not sound much worse than life on earth. Here's the darkly funny part. The labour shortage caused by the plague eventually tips the balance of power. With so many workers dead, the surviving peasants suddenly have leverage. Lords need labourers more than labourers need lords. Peasants start demanding higher wages, better conditions, actual food that isn't mouldy. Some lords agree because they're desperate. Others refuse and watch their estates crumble. It's the first time in centuries that peasants have any negotiating power, and it's only happening because enough people died to break the system. But that's later. Right now, in the thick of the plague, you're just trying to survive. You drag yourself to the fields, even though every step feels like your bones are grinding together. You work until you physically can't anymore. Then you collapse in the dirt and hope someone finds you before you die. If you're lucky, a fellow peasant will drag you back to your hovel. If you're not lucky, you'll wake up on the plague cart. Your lord never visits the fields. He's safe in his manor house, eating actual meat while you're chewing on turnips and prayers. He doesn't see the bodies piling up. He doesn't hear the coughing or the crying. He just sees numbers, bushels of grain, head of livestock, percentage of rent collected. You're not a person to him. You're a line item in a ledger. And if that line item stops producing, it gets replaced. That's the feudal system during a plague. Your job doesn't care that you're dying. Your lord doesn't care that you're dying. The only thing that matters is production, and if you can't produce, you're worthless. It's bleak, it's brutal, and it's exactly how things work. So tomorrow, when you wake up with a fever and a swollen lymph node, you'll still go to work, because the alternative is worse. Or, at least, that's what they tell you. One day, a figure appears in your village, and it's straight out of a fever dream. He's wearing a long black coat, gloves, and a leather mask with a beak stuffed with herbs and flowers. This is the plague doctor. He looks like a nightmare bird, and honestly, he's not here to help. He's here to document who's dying and maybe poke you with a stick. His medical advice? Try not to die. His treatment? Bloodletting, which is basically just speeding up the dying process. You'd be better off with a magic 8-ball. The plague doctor is supposed to inspire confidence, but instead he inspires pure terror. When you see him walking down your street, you know things have gotten bad. He's a last resort, a symbol that your village has officially been declared a plague zone. Towns hire these doctors specifically to deal with plague victims, paying them hazard wages because nobody else wants the job. And honestly, the plague doctors know they're probably going to die too. They're just hoping the money is worth it. Spoiler, it usually isn't. Let's talk about that outfit, which is iconic for all the wrong reasons. The mask is designed by Charles Delorme in 1619, though earlier versions exist during your plague. The beak isn't decorative, it's functional, or at least it's supposed to be. The theory is that the beak creates distance between the doctor and the patient's corrupt air. Inside the beak, they stuff herbs, flowers, camphor, and other aromatic substances. Roses, mint, lavender, sometimes vinegar-soaked sponges. The idea is that these pleasant smells will overpower the miasma and protect the doctor from infection. Does it work? Absolutely not. But it does make the doctor smell better than the rotting corpses he's examining. So there's that. The leather mask covers his entire face, with glass openings for the eyes so he can see. The overall effect is deeply unsettling. You're sick, feverish, possibly hallucinating. and this leather birdman leans over you. It's the last thing many people see before they die, which explains why plague doctors show up in nightmares for centuries afterward. The rest of the outfit is equally dramatic. A long, waxed overcoat, usually black, that goes down to his ankles. The wax coating is supposed to repel disease, or at least make bodily fluids slide off easier. Heavy gloves, usually leather, a wide-brimmed hat to identify him as a medical professional, and a wooden cane which he uses to examine patients without touching them. He'll lift your clothing with the cane, poke at your buboes, check your pulse by touching your wrist with a stick. It's medicine at arm's length, literally. When the plague doctor arrives at your house, he doesn't knock gently and wait for an invitation. He walks in like he owns the place, because in a sense, he does. He's been authorized by the town to enter any home where plague is suspected. Privacy is not a concern. He heads straight for the sick person, let's say it's you, and begins his examination. He doesn't ask how you're feeling. He doesn't offer comfort. He leans down, peers at you through those glass eye holes, and starts making notes. Fever? Check. Sweating? Check. Buboes in the armpit and groin? Check. Blackened fingers indicating necrosis? Check. He's seen this 100 times before. Your textbook plague. He might measure your pulse, but he's not checking if you'll survive. He's estimating how long until you die. 3 days, maybe 4 if you're strong. He writes it down. Now comes the treatment, which is where things go from bad to worse. The plague doctor might lance your buboes with a hot iron, draining the pus and blood. This is excruciating, and there's no anesthesia. You scream. He doesn't react. He's heard screaming all day, every day, for weeks. Your screaming is background noise. Sometimes, lancing the buboes helps pure luck because it reduces pressure, and occasionally the body fights off the infection. More often, it just adds agony to your last days on Earth. Then there's bloodletting. The doctor pulls out a small blade and makes an incision in your arm or leg, letting blood drain into a bowl. The theory is that this balances your humours and purges the disease. The reality is that you're already fighting a deadly infection, and now you're also losing blood. It's counterproductive at best, actively harmful at worst, but it's standard medical practice, so that's what you get. Some plague doctors prescribe pills made from crushed gemstones, herbs, and powdered unicorn horn, which is actually narwhal tusk, but nobody knows that. These pills do nothing except cost a fortune. If your family has any money, the doctor takes it in exchange for useless medicine. If you don't have money, he shrugs and moves on. The free market applies even during apocalypses. Occasionally, a plague doctor will try something truly bizarre. He might strap a live chicken to your buboes, believing the bird will draw out the disease. The chicken dies, obviously, and you're no better off, but now you smell like dead chicken in addition to everything else. Or he might recommend sitting in a sewer, breathing in the fumes, based on the logic that extreme bad air cancels out plague bad air. It doesn't. It just gives you dysentery on top of plague, which is objectively worse. The plague doctor isn't cruel, exactly. He's just overwhelmed, undereducated, and working with medieval medical knowledge that's mostly wrong. He's doing his best in a system that has no idea what it's dealing with. But from your perspective, lying in bed with a fever and watching this birdman poke you with a stick, he seems like death's personal assistant. He's the harbinger. When he shows up, hope leaves. After examining you, the plague doctor makes his notes and moves to the next house. He sees dozens of patients a day, often hundreds during peak outbreaks. He doesn't wash his hands between patients because hand washing isn't a concept yet. His gloves are covered in blood and pus from the last person he examined, and now he's touching you. He's essentially a disease vector in a bird costume, spreading infection as he tries to treat it. irony doesn't begin to cover it. Some plague doctors are legitimate physicians trying to help. Others are opportunists who bought a costume and are pretending to be doctors because the pay is good and no one's checking credentials during a pandemic. You have no way of knowing which type you're dealing with. Either way, the outcome is usually the same. You die, and he moves on to the next patient. The plague doctor keeps records, which is probably his most useful function. He documents who's sick, who's dead, and where the outbreaks are concentrated. This data doesn't save anyone in the moment, but it helps towns understand the scale of the disaster. The doctor reports to the town council or the local lord, providing updates. 30 dead this week, 50 new cases, the outbreak is spreading to the Western District. It's medieval epidemiology, and it's grimly fascinating. When the plague doctor finally leaves your village, either because the outbreak is over or because he's caught the plague himself, nobody's sorry to see him go. He tried to help, maybe. Or he tried to get paid. Either way, his presence is a reminder of death, suffering, and the absolute failure of medieval medicine to do anything meaningful. The bird mask becomes a symbol of the plague itself, eerie, unforgettable, and deeply unwelcome. And if you survive your encounter with the plague doctor, you'll remember that mask for the rest of your life. You'll see it in your dreams, smell the herbs stuffed in the beak, feel the wooden cane poking at your buboes. The plague doctor is supposed to be a healer, but he's actually a spectre. He's the human embodiment of a world that has no idea how to save itself. Sweet dreams. The Birdman is watching. So you want to not catch the plague? Good luck. You live in a one-room house with your entire extended family, none of whom bathe. You share a bed with 3 siblings. There's no running water. No soap. Rats live in your walls. Fleas live on the rats. The plague lives on the fleas. You're basically living in a biological weapon. Avoiding infection is like trying to stay dry in a swimming pool. You can try, but you're kidding yourself. Let's start with your living situation, which is a public health disaster even without the plague. Your house is small, maybe 12 by 15 feet, if you're lucky. Inside this space lives you, your parents, your siblings, your grandparents if they're still alive, and possibly an aunt or uncle who has nowhere else to go. That's 7 to 10 people sharing one room. There's no privacy. There are no separate bedrooms. Everyone sleeps in the same space, often in the same bed. Body heat is the primary source of warmth during winter, which sounds cozy until you remember that everyone smells terrible and someone always has lice. The floor is dirt. Not wood, not stone dirt. You've maybe covered it with straw or rushes to make it softer, but those rushes are months old and are basically a compost heap of food scraps, animal droppings, and human waste that missed the chamber pot. The rushes are changed a few times a year if you're fastidious, less often if you're not. They're breeding grounds for fleas, lice, and basically every parasite known to medieval Europe. You walk on them barefoot. You sleep 6 inches above them. They're part of the ecosystem of your home. Speaking of the chamber pot, that's your toilet. It's a ceramic or wooden pot that sits in the corner of the room. Everyone uses it. When it's full, someone, usually you, carries it outside and dumps it in the street or in a designated midden heap. Sometimes you dump it out the window, which is why walking under windows in medieval towns is a health hazard. The phrase gardez-le, watch out for the water, originates from this practice. Except it's not water. It's everything that comes out of the human body, and it's being thrown into the street where it mixes with animal waste, rotting food, and whatever else is decomposing. There's no running water. If you want water, you walk to the communal well in the centre of town and draw it up in a bucket. That well services the entire village. People wash their hands in it if they wash their hands at all. Animals drink from it. Sometimes dead animals fall into it and nobody notices for weeks. The water is not clean. It's not remotely clean. You drink it anyway because the alternative is dying of thirst. Sometimes you boil it first if you're making stew, but mostly you just drink it straight and hope for the best. Bathing is rare. Not once a week, rare. More like a few times a year, rare. The church has some weird views on bathing. Nakedness is associated with sin, and public bathhouses are viewed as dens of iniquity where people get up to immoral activities, which, to be fair, they do. But the side effect is that regular bathing falls out of fashion. You might wash your face and hands occasionally, but a full body bath? That's a special occasion. Maybe twice a year, maybe less. You don't smell good, but neither does anyone else, so it's fine. Except when a plague shows up and personal hygiene becomes the difference between life and death. Except you don't know that, because germ theory doesn't exist yet. Your clothes are wool or rough linen. You own maybe 2 outfits, one for everyday wear and one for Sundays and special occasions. You wash them occasionally by beating them with rocks in the river. There's no detergent, just water and elbow grease. The clothes don't get clean so much as slightly less dirty. You wear the same tunic for days, sometimes weeks. It absorbs your sweat, your body oils, your general filth. It's a wearable petri dish. Fleas love it, lice love it. You're basically a mobile habitat for parasites. Now let's talk about rats, which are everywhere. They live in your walls. They nest in your grain stores. They scurry across your floor at night. You can hear them scratching and squeaking. Sometimes you wake up with a rat on your chest, looking for crumbs. You try to kill them, but for every rat you kill, 3 more appear. They're prolific breeders, and your house is paradise for them, warm, full of food scraps, and no effective predator because you killed all the cats, remember? The rats carry fleas. The fleas carry plague. When a rat dies from plague, which happens constantly, the fleas abandon the corpse and look for a new host. Sometimes that host is another rat. Sometimes it's you. The flea bites you, and in that moment, bacteria enter your bloodstream. You don't notice. It's just another flea bite, and you've got dozens of those already. But this one is different. This one is a death sentence. So let's say you're trying to avoid infection. What are your options? The medical advice is to avoid bad smells and corrupt air, so you carry a bouquet of flowers or a pomander filled with cloves and cinnamon. You hold it under your nose whenever you go outside. Does it prevent plague? No. Does it make you feel like you're doing something? Absolutely. You're engaging in medieval magical thinking. If I smell good, bad smells can't hurt me. It's the equivalent of closing your eyes and believing you're invisible. You're also told to avoid sick people, which is sensible advice. The problem is that everyone is potentially sick. Your neighbour might look fine in the morning and be dead by evening. There's no way to tell who's infected until the symptoms appear, and by then, you've already been exposed. You try to keep your distance, but you live in a cramped village where social distancing is physically impossible. The streets are narrow, the houses are close together, the market is crowded. Avoiding people means becoming a hermit, and even then, you're still living with your family in a one-room house. Some people try sealing their windows and doors, believing that bad air can't penetrate a closed house. This backfires spectacularly. You're now trapped inside with stale air, no ventilation, and whatever diseases are already circulating among your family, it's a breeding ground for infection. Plus, you still need to go outside eventually for food and water, so the seal is pointless. It's security theatre, medieval edition. You might try quarantine if someone in your family gets sick. You isolate them in a corner of the room, maybe hang a sheet to separate them from everyone else. But you're still breathing the same air. You're still using the same chamber pot. You're still sleeping a few feet away. The sheet is psychological, not practical. When they cough, you hear it. When they moan, you hear it. When they die, you're the one who has to drag the body out. You've been exposed the entire time. Some wealthier people flee to the countryside, reasoning that rural areas will be safer than crowded cities. Sometimes this works. Sometimes they bring the plague with them and start a new outbreak. There's no way to know if you're infected until symptoms appear, and symptoms can take days to show up. You could be feeling fine, travel to a remote village, and then start coughing 3 days later. Congratulations, you're now patient zero in a new plague zone. The people who fled to avoid death have become vectors of death. Irony is the only thing more contagious than plague. The brutal truth is that avoiding infection in medieval Europe during the plague is nearly impossible. Everything about your life, your housing, your hygiene, your diet, your proximity to others makes you vulnerable. You're living in exactly the conditions plague bacteria thrive in. The fleas are already in your house. The rats are already in your walls. The bacteria is already in the air, on surfaces, on the people you interact with daily. You can carry flowers. You can pray. You can avoid sick people as best you can. But ultimately, whether you get infected is luck. Random, terrible luck. Some people survive plague exposure and never get sick. Others die within days. There's no rhyme or reason to it. No pattern you can exploit. You just wake up every day and hope today isn't the day you develop a fever. And that's the most terrifying part, the lack of control. In the modern world, we understand disease transmission. We have antibiotics, vaccines, sanitation systems. We can take meaningful action to protect ourselves. In 1347, you can't. You're helpless, and you know it. All you can do is wait and see if the plague chooses you. Spoiler alert, it probably will. It begins with a fever, then chills, then you're sweating through your one tunic, which you haven't washed in 3 months. Your head pounds, your joints ache. You feel like you've been run over by a medieval cart, which, let's be honest, is a real possibility. Then come the buboes, swollen, painful lumps in your armpits, neck, and groin. They're the size of eggs. Sometimes they burst, sometimes they don't. Either way, you're having a bad time, and you've got maybe a week to live. Enjoy. Let's walk through what's actually happening inside your body, though you have no idea because medieval medicine thinks your humours are just having a bad day. When the plague-infected flea bit you 3 to 7 days ago, it injected Yersinia pestis bacteria into your bloodstream. Those bacteria have been multiplying, setting up shop in your lymph nodes, the body's filtration system. Your immune system is fighting back, sending white blood cells to the infected nodes, which causes them to swell. That swelling is the buboes, and they're about to make your life a living nightmare. Day 1 of symptoms. You wake up feeling wrong. Not, I slept badly, wrong, but fundamentally wrong. Your body aches in places you didn't know could ache. Your head throbs with every heartbeat. You're cold, so you pull your blanket tighter, but 30 seconds later, you're burning up and kicking the blanket off. Then you're freezing again. Your body can't regulate its temperature because your immune system is in full panic mode, and fever is its nuclear option. You try to stand up, and the room spins. Your legs feel like they're made of wet rope. You stumble to the fire pit and try to warm yourself, but the heat makes you nauseous. Your mother touches your forehead and pulls her hand back quickly. You're burning up. She gives you water from the bucket, that questionable well water we discussed, and you drink it even though swallowing hurts. Your throat feels like you've swallowed broken glass. By midday, the headache is unbearable. It's not a normal headache. It's like someone's driving a spike through your skull from the inside. Light hurts. Sound hurts. Existing hurts. You lie back down on your straw mattress and try to sleep, but you can't because your brain is on fire and your body won't stop shivering even though you're sweating profusely. The sweat soaks through your tunic and into the straw beneath you. You smell like sickness, sour and wrong. Day 2, the buboes appear. You wake up, if you can call it that, since you barely slept and there's a lump under your left armpit. You touch it, experimentally, and the pain is so sharp you gasp. It's tender, hot to the touch, and growing. Within hours, it's the size of a walnut. By evening, it's the size of a hen's egg. Your armpit looks deformed, like you're smuggling fruit under your skin. The bubo is hard and red and angry, and every movement of your arm sends lightning bolts of pain through your shoulder. But wait, there's more. You check your groin and find another lump, this one even larger. Walking is agony. Sitting is agony. Lying down is slightly less agonizing, so that's what you do. Your neck has a smaller bubo forming, and when you turn your head, it feels like someone's stabbing you with a hot poker. These buboes are your lymph nodes, swelling with bacteria and immune cells. Fighting a battle, your body is losing. The fever climbs higher. You're delirious now, drifting in and out of consciousness. When you're awake, the room looks strange, shadows move wrong, faces distort, sounds echo oddly. When you're asleep, you have vivid nightmares. You dream of drowning, of being buried alive, of rats eating your fingers. You wake up screaming, and your family tries to calm you, but you don't recognize them. For a few minutes, you think your mother is a demon. The fever is cooking your brain. Day 3. Things get worse, which you didn't think was possible. The buboes are massive now, grotesque swellings that make you look like a medical illustration of what not to look like. One of them has turned purple-black, indicating necrosis. The tissue is dying. The smell is horrific, like rotting meat, because that's essentially what it is. Your body is decomposing while you're still alive. Your family can smell it from across the room. When they bring you food, a thin gruel you can't eat, they hold their breath. Some buboes burst spontaneously, and this is somehow both better and worse. Better because the pressure is released, and for a brief moment the pain lessens. Worse because now there's an open wound, weeping pus and blood and lymphatic fluid. The wound won't heal. It can't heal because your body is fighting a losing battle against billions of bacteria. The fluid that drains out is yellowish and streaked with blood, and it soaks into your already disgusting tunic. The smell intensifies. Flies appear, attracted by the scent of decay. They land on your open buboes. You're too weak to brush them away. If the buboes don't burst on their own, they just keep swelling. The pain becomes constant, a throbbing agony that never stops. You can't move without screaming. You can't not move because you need to shift position occasionally or your muscles cramp. Every option is torture. You beg for someone to cut the buboes open, but nobody wants to touch you. They're afraid of catching what you have. They're not wrong to be afraid. Meanwhile, other symptoms pile on. You develop a rash, red spots that spread across your chest and back. Some of these spots darken and turn into hemorrhages under the skin. You're bleeding internally in dozens of tiny places. Your fingers and toes might start turning black as blood flow is restricted and tissue dies. This is where the plague gets its name, the Black Death. Not because it makes you sad, though it does, but because parts of your body literally turn black with necrosis. You're vomiting now, even though you haven't eaten anything substantial in days. Your body is rejecting water. Everything you drink comes back up, which means you're getting dehydrated on top of everything else. Your lips crack and bleed. Your tongue is swollen and coated with a thick white film. Your breath, on the rare occasions you're conscious enough to notice, smells like death because you're dying. Your body knows it, even if your fevered mind doesn't. Day 4 or 5, you've entered the terminal phase, though there's no medical term for it because medieval doctors just call it dying badly. Your heart rate is erratic. Your breathing is shallow and rapid. You're no longer fully conscious, just drifting in a twilight state between life and death. Your family has stopped trying to give you water. They're just waiting now. Someone has probably already called for the plague cart. The bacteria have spread throughout your body. They're in your bloodstream, causing septicemia. They're in your lungs, causing pneumonic plague, which means you're coughing up blood. Every cough sprays infected droplets into the air. And now you're not just dying, you're a biological weapon, infecting everyone around you. If your family catches pneumonic plague from you, they'll die even faster. It kills within 2 to 3 days and is nearly 100% fatal without antibiotics. Some people develop plague meningitis, where the bacteria infect the membranes around the brain and spinal cord. If this happens, you'll have seizures. You'll lose control of your muscles. You'll stop making sense when you try to speak. Your last words will be gibberish, and your family won't know if you're trying to say goodbye or if your brain has just shut down. Spoiler, it's the latter. In your final hours, your organs start shutting down. Your kidneys stop processing waste. Your liver gives up. Your heart keeps beating, but it's struggling, pumping weakly as your blood pressure drops. Your extremities are cold and clammy. Your breathing becomes irregular, long pauses between breaths, then sudden gasps. This is called Cheyne-Stokes respiration, and it means death is imminent. And then, finally, you stop breathing. Your heart stops. The fever breaks because there's no body temperature to regulate anymore. You're dead. The whole process took maybe a week, possibly less. From the first fever to your last breath was a condensed nightmare of pain, fear, and degradation. Your family wraps your body in the same blanket you were sweating into days ago. They don't wash you, there's no point, and they're afraid to touch you. They drag you outside and wait for the plague cart. When it arrives, your body is tossed on top of a dozen others. You land face down on someone's legs, your arm draped over a stranger's chest. The cart rolls away. A bell rings. Someone shouts, "Bring out your dead." In the mass grave, you're buried under 6 feet of other bodies. There's no coffin, no marker, no prayer specific to you. Just earth and lime and the weight of 100 corpses. Within weeks, nobody will remember exactly where you're buried. Within months, grass will grow over the pit. Within years, people will build houses on top of it, never knowing they're living above the dead. That's the plague. That's what the symptoms are like. It's not poetic. It's not merciful. It's just brutal. Biological reality, bacteria doing what bacteria do, and your body losing the fight in the most painful way possible. Sleep tight. When people realize you've got the plague, their first instinct isn't to nurse you back to health, it's to run. Your own family might lock you in a room and leave food outside the door if you're lucky. If you're not lucky, they just bolt. Plague houses are marked with a red cross on the door, like a medieval scarlet letter. No one comes in, no one goes out. It's like being quarantined, except with no Netflix, no Uber Eats, and a 70% chance you're going to die alone on a pile of dirty straw. Let's talk about what happens the moment your family realizes you're infected. You've been feeling sick for a day or two, but you've been hiding it because you know what happens to plague victims. You've seen it, everyone's seen it. But this morning, you couldn't hide the bubo under your arm anymore. Your mother was helping you change your tunic. The old one was soaked with sweat, and she saw it. The egg-sized lump, the discoloured skin, the thing that means you're going to die. She drops the clean tunic. She takes 3 steps backward. She doesn't say anything, but her face says everything. Horror, fear, and worse, resignation. You want to tell her it's not that bad, that maybe it's just a cyst or a swollen gland from something else, but you both know what it is. You've seen enough buboes in the past month to recognize one when it's growing out of your own body. Your mother calls for your father. He comes in, takes one look, and his expression hardens. He's doing the math in his head. If you stay in the house, everyone else will get infected. The plague spreads through households like wildfire. If he lets you stay, his wife will die. His other children will die. He'll die. The logical choice, the only choice, really, is to isolate you or get rid of you entirely. We need to move him, your father says. Not, we need to help him, or we need to get the doctor. Just move him, like your furniture, like you're already dead and they're just rearranging the corpse. You want to argue, to plead, to promise you'll stay in the corner and not breathe on anyone. But you can't, because your throat is swollen and talking hurts, and also because you know they're right. You are a threat. You're a walking contagion. If you love your family, the best thing you can do is get away from them. Some families have a plan for this. There's a shed out back, or a storage room, or a barn. They move you there, give you a blanket and a bucket for waste, and that's it. You're isolated. They'll leave food outside the door once a day, bread, maybe some water, but they won't come inside. They'll knock and leave quickly, as if proximity alone could kill them. Which, to be fair, it might. If you've developed pneumonic plague and you cough, anyone within a few feet can inhale the bacteria, so they're not being paranoid, they're being practical. But here's the thing. Being practical doesn't make it any less devastating. You're alone in a dark shed, feverish and terrified, listening to your family's voices through the walls. You can hear your siblings playing. You can hear your mother cooking dinner. You can hear life continuing without you. And you're not even dead yet. You're just pre-dead, already being mourned while your heart still beats. Some families don't even give you the shed. They just push you outside and bar the door. Go to the plague house, they say, which is a building on the edge of town where they put all the infected people. It's essentially a warehouse for the dying. There's no doctor there, no one to bring water, just a dozen other victims lying on the floor, coughing and moaning and waiting to die. The smell is indescribable. Sweat, vomit, feces, rotting flesh. The plague house isn't a hospital. It's a tomb you check into before you're dead. If you can't make it to the plague house, you just lie down wherever, in an alley, on the side of the road, under a tree. People step over you. They avert their eyes. Children stare until their parents yank them away. Don't look, the parents hiss. Don't get close. You're not a person anymore. You're a hazard, a thing to be avoided. The town will send someone to collect your body eventually, but not until you're actually dead. Until then, you're on your own. The really wealthy families have a different approach. They abandon the infected person and flee. They pack up their valuables, load them onto a cart, and leave town entirely. They don't even tell the sick family member they're leaving. They just go. You wake up one morning, stumble out of your room with a fever and swollen lymph nodes, and the house is empty. Your family is gone. There's no note, no goodbye, just silence and the realization that you've been left behind to die alone. This happens constantly. Boccaccio, writing about the plague in Florence, describes it. Brother abandoned brother, uncle abandoned nephew, wife abandoned husband, parents even abandoned their own children. It's not exaggeration, it's documented fact. The plague breaks social bonds that are supposed to be unbreakable. The instinct for self-preservation overrides everything else: love, duty, loyalty. When death is everywhere, people choose themselves. But let's say your family doesn't abandon you outright. Let's say they try to care for you from a distance. Your mother leaves food outside your door. Your father checks on you by shouting through the wall. "Are you alive in there?" he calls. You try to answer, but you're coughing too hard. He takes the silence as confirmation that you're still breathing, for now. Days pass. The food stops coming regularly. Maybe your mother is sick now too. Maybe they've run out of supplies. Maybe they've decided that feeding you is pointless because you're going to die anyway. You don't blame them exactly. You understand the logic. But understanding doesn't make the hunger any easier. You're starving and dying of plague simultaneously, which seems redundant, but here we are. Eventually, you stop hearing voices through the walls. Either your family has died, or they've left, or they're just being very quiet. You don't know which is worse. You bang on the door, try to get someone's attention, but nobody comes. You're too weak to break the door down. You're trapped, alone. And you realize that this is how you're going to die. Locked in a shed, abandoned by everyone you've ever loved, with only the sound of your own labored breathing for company. When you finally die, it might be hours or days before anyone finds you. Your body will start to decompose in the summer heat. The smell will eventually alert someone, and they'll come with a stick to poke you and confirm you're dead. Then you're loaded onto the plague cart with the other bodies. Your family, if they survived, might not even know you're gone. There's no death certificate, no record. You just disappear into a mass grave, and life moves on. Some plague victims are found weeks later, mummified in their sealed rooms. The door was locked or barricaded, and nobody checked. The body is so decomposed that identification is impossible. Could be anyone. Could be you. The body is dragged out and burned or buried, and that's the end of the story. Here's the psychological horror. Your family's abandonment isn't cruelty, it's survival. They're not monsters. They're scared humans making impossible choices. Stay and die with you, or leave and maybe live. When you frame it like that, the choice is obvious, but it doesn't make the experience any less traumatic for the person being abandoned. You understand why they left. You'd probably do the same in their position, but understanding doesn't fill the void, doesn't make the loneliness bearable, doesn't make dying alone any less terrifying. The plague doesn't just kill people, it kills relationships, it kills trust, it kills the basic human instinct to comfort the suffering. It turns families into strangers and strangers into threats. Everyone is alone, even when surrounded by people, especially when surrounded by people, because those people might be infected. In later outbreaks, authorities try to enforce quarantines more systematically. If one person in a household is infected, the entire household is locked in. Guards are posted outside to make sure nobody leaves. Food is passed through a window. This is supposed to contain the spread, but mostly it just ensures that everyone in the house dies instead of just the first victim. Entire families are wiped out because they couldn't escape the one infected person. The quarantine is a death sentence for everyone inside. And if you try to break quarantine, if you're healthy but trapped with dying family members and you try to escape, you're arrested or killed. The guards have orders to prevent anyone from leaving plague houses. Some people try anyway. They sneak out at night, climb through windows, bribe guards. Some make it. Others are caught and dragged back or killed as examples. The message is clear. You stay in the plague house until everyone inside is dead. No exceptions. So when your family abandons you, they might actually be doing you a favor. At least you die alone instead of watching everyone you love die first. At least you're not trapped in a room with your dying children, listening to them beg for water you don't have. At least you're not the last one alive in a house full of corpses, waiting for your turn. The plague turns abandonment into mercy. And that might be the most horrifying thing about it. Food's already pretty grim in medieval times, but during the plague, it's a nightmare. Half the farmers are dead, so there's no one to harvest crops. The markets are closed. Supply chains have collapsed. You're eating whatever you can find. Mouldy bread, turnips, maybe some suspicious meat. And you can't exactly be picky because starvation is also trying to kill you. It's like living through a global pandemic while also doing intermittent fasting. except you didn't choose this. Let's establish what you're normally eating in medieval Europe, which is already borderline survival rations. If you're a peasant, and statistically you are, your diet consists primarily of bread. Not good bread, not sourdough from a trendy bakery. We're talking dense, dark bread made from rye, barley, or whatever grain didn't rot in storage. It's heavy, coarse, and sometimes contaminated with ergot fungus, which causes hallucinations and gangrene. But it's calories, and calories keep you alive. So you eat it. You also eat pottage, which is a fancy word for boiled whatever. You throw vegetables into a pot with water onions, cabbage, turnips, peas, and boil it until it's edible. If you're lucky, there's a bit of salted pork or bacon fat for flavour. If you're not lucky, it's just vegetables and sadness. You eat this for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Every day, for your entire life. Variety is not a concept in your world. Meat is rare. You might have chicken a few times a year. Beef or pork is for special occasions like weddings or harvest festivals. Fish is more common if you live near water, but it's usually salted or dried into something with the texture of shoe leather. Fresh food is a luxury. Most of what you eat is preserved, salted, dried, pickled, or fermented, because refrigeration won't be invented for another 600 years. Now the plague arrives, and your already bad food situation becomes catastrophic. The problem starts with labour. Farming is labour intensive. You need people to plough fields, plant seeds, tend crops, and harvest grain. When half the population dies in a few months, suddenly there aren't enough farmers. Fields go unplanted. Crops rot in the ground because there's no one to harvest them. The people who are still alive are either sick, caring for the sick, or dead. Nobody's worried about the wheat. The animals suffer too. Livestock need constant care, feeding, watering, milking, slaughtering. When the farmers die, the animals are left to fend for themselves. Cows wander into the streets, udders swollen and painful because nobody's milking them. Pigs root through abandoned houses looking for food. Chickens go feral. Some animals starve to death. Others are eaten by predators or by desperate humans who don't know how to properly butcher them. You end up with meat that's diseased, tough, or just wrong. But again, starvation is the alternative, so you eat it. The market shut down almost immediately. Market day used to be the social and economic hub of your week. Farmers bringing produce, butchers selling meat, bakers selling bread. But when the plague hits, nobody wants to gather in crowds. The market square becomes a ghost town. The few vendors who do show up are selling whatever they manage to scavenge. The prices are astronomical because supply and demand is a harsh mistress. A loaf of bread that cost a penny now costs 10 pennies, if you even have pennies, which you probably don't. Let's say you still have some grain stored from last year's harvest. That's good news, right? Wrong. The grain is probably full of weevils and rodents. Rats have been eating your stores, and now you're competing with them for food. You sift the grain to remove the bugs mostly, and grind it into flour using a hand mill. The flour is greyish and smells faintly of mouse urine, but it's what you have. You mix it with water, form it into flat cakes, and bake them over your fire. The resulting bread is dense, bitter, and possibly toxic. You eat it anyway. Vegetables are scarce. Your garden plot is overgrown because you've been too sick or too busy caring for the dying to tend it. The few vegetables that did grow have been eaten by rabbits or stolen by desperate neighbours. You manage to dig up some turnips, always turnips, the cockroach of vegetables, and add them to your pottage. The turnips are woody and flavourless, but they're food-shaped, and that's good enough. Water is its own nightmare. The wells are contaminated with corpses, both animal and human. Someone who was sick stumbled to the well, collapsed, and fell in. or someone dumped a dead body into the well because they didn't know what else to do with it. You're supposed to boil water before drinking it, but you don't always have the energy or firewood. So you drink it straight and hope you don't get dysentery on top of everything else. Sometimes you do. Diarrhea plus plague is a combination that kills quickly. If you're wealthy, and let's be clear, most people aren't, you might have access to preserved foods, salted meat, dried fruit, honey. These are luxury items stored in barrels and jars, and they last longer than fresh food. But even the wealthy are running out. Supply chains are broken. The merchant who imported spices from the east is dead. The vineyard that produced wine is abandoned. You're eating your stockpiled supplies and wondering what happens when they run out. The answer is, you starve. Or you start eating things you wouldn't normally eat, and that's where things get dark. When you're starving, your standards drop precipitously. You start eyeing things you'd never consider food. Tree bark can be ground into flour. It's mostly fibre and has almost no nutritional value, but it fills your stomach. Grass can be boiled into a paste. Acorns can be leached of tannins and made into bread. Leather can be boiled until it's soft enough to chew. You're essentially eating materials, not meals. There are documented cases of people eating rats during the plague. Not as a delicacy, but as a last resort. You trap a rat, skin it, roast it over a fire, and eat it. It tastes gamey and wrong, but it's protein. The irony, the absolutely pitch-black irony, is that eating rats probably exposes you to more plague-infected fleas. You're consuming the very thing that's killing you. But hunger is a powerful motivator, and a starving person doesn't think about fleas. They think about not starving. Some people turn to begging. They go door to door asking for food, but every door is either locked or answered by someone just as desperate. I have nothing, they say, and they're telling the truth. The social safety net, such as it was, has completely collapsed. The church used to distribute food to the poor, but the local priest is dead and the church is being used to store bodies. Charity has become impossible when everyone is suffering. Then there's theft. Looting becomes common. You break into abandoned houses looking for food. You steal from corpses, checking their pockets and homes for anything edible. It's not something you'd normally do. You're not a thief, but morality is flexible when you're starving. You tell yourself the dead don't need food. You tell yourself you'll repay the debt somehow if you survive. You probably won't survive, so the debt doesn't matter. In some areas, there are reports of cannibalism. This is controversial and possibly exaggerated, but the historical record suggests it happened in isolated cases. When you've eaten everything else and you're watching your children starve, the unthinkable becomes thinkable. It's the absolute nadir of human desperation. Most people don't reach this point. They die of plague or starvation first. But some do. The plague pushes people past every boundary of civilized behavior. Let's say you manage to find food. You're eating your moldy bread and turnip pottage. You should feel lucky, except you can't enjoy it because you're sick. Your appetite is gone. Your throat is swollen. Swallowing is painful. You force down a few bites because your body needs fuel to fight the infection, but it's a struggle. And then you vomit it back up because your body is rejecting everything. So you're starving even though you have food. It's the cruelest joke. If you survive the plague, you emerge into a world where food production has been decimated. It'll take years, maybe decades, for agriculture to recover. Fields that went unplanted this year won't produce next year. Animals that died or went feral need to be replaced. The knowledge that died with the farmers when to plant, how to irrigate, which seeds to save, has to be relearned. You're looking at famine conditions for the foreseeable future. But that's assuming you survive. Most people don't. They die of plague, or they die of starvation, or they die of the combination. Their last meal is a piece of mouldy bread and some questionable water. They die hungry. and their bodies are carted away to make room for the next person who's also dying hungry. The plague doesn't just kill with bacteria, it kills with hunger, it kills with thirst, it kills by destroying the systems that keep people alive. Food is survival, and when food disappears, survival becomes impossible. You're not just fighting disease, you're fighting entropy, and entropy always wins. The church has a solution to the plague, and it's very simple. You're being punished for your sins. The cure? Pray more. Confess your sins. Flagellate yourself in public, literally. There are groups of people called flagellants who wander from town to town whipping themselves bloody, thinking it'll make God stop the plague. Spoiler, it doesn't. It just adds open wounds to your list of problems, which, in a plague zone, is not ideal. Let's talk about the church's role in medieval society, because it's massive. The church isn't just a religious institution, it's the religious institution. It controls education, healthcare, moral guidance, and most of your money through tithes. When something goes wrong, people look to the church for answers. So when the plague shows up and starts killing everyone, the church is expected to explain why this is happening and how to stop it. The explanation the church provides is theological. This is divine punishment. God is angry. Humanity has sinned too much. Greed, lust, pride, vanity, all the usual suspects, and now God is cleansing the world with plague. It's the great flood all over again, except instead of water, it's bacteria. This explanation makes sense to medieval people, because everything in their worldview is filtered through religion. Nothing happens without God's will. If people are dying, God wills it. Therefore, you must have done something to deserve it. The solution, according to the church, is repentance. Confess your sins to a priest. Beg God for forgiveness. Attend Mass more frequently. Donate money to the church. Always donate money to the church. Pray constantly. If you pray hard enough, maybe God will spare you. It's spiritual bootstrapping. Pull yourself up by your prayer beads and save yourself through faith. But confession becomes complicated when the priests start dying. And they're dying in huge numbers. Priests have more contact with plague victims than almost anyone else they administer. Last rites, hear confessions, comfort the dying. They're constantly exposed, and they don't have protective equipment, just robes and prayers. The mortality rate among clergy is catastrophic. Some estimates suggest up to 40-50% of priests die during the first wave of plague. Entire monasteries are wiped out. When your local priest dies, there's nobody to hear your confession. The bishop is supposed to send a replacement, but the bishop might be dead too. Or the replacement priest arrives, takes one look at the plague-ridden village, and flees. Some priests stick around out of duty or faith, but many don't. They're human, and humans have a strong survival instinct. So you're left without spiritual guidance at exactly the moment you need it most. The church tries to address the priest shortage by ordaining replacement clergy quickly, too quickly. Normally, becoming a priest requires years of training, education, and evaluation. But during the plague, those standards are lowered, way lowered. Men with minimal education and questionable morals are ordained just to fill the gaps. The quality of clergy plummets. You end up with priests who barely know Latin, who can't perform the sacraments correctly, who are in it for the money rather than faith. But they're all you have, so you confess your sins to this barely literate charlatan and hope God doesn't notice. Then there are the flagellants, who take religious devotion to an extreme that borders on insanity. These are lay people, not clergy, who form processions and travel from town to town whipping themselves. Literally. They use leather whips with metal tips, scourging their own backs until they bleed. They believe that by suffering physical pain, they're demonstrating penance and appealing directly to God to stop the plague. When flagellants arrive in your town, it's a spectacle. There might be 30 or 40 of them, dressed in white robes with red crosses. They march into the town square and then they start the ritual. They strip to the waist in front of everyone, including women and children, and begin whipping themselves. They chant hymns and prayers while blood runs down their backs. They do this for hours. Sometimes they collapse from blood loss or exhaustion. The crowd watches, transfixed and horrified. The flagellants claim they have a letter from Jesus himself authorizing their mission. They don't, but they're convincing performers, and desperate people want to believe. Some townspeople join the processions, thinking that collective suffering will be more effective than individual prayer. The flagellant movement spreads across Europe like a fever. The Church's official position on flagellants is complicated. Initially, some clergy support them. The movement seems pious, after all. But then the flagellants start getting weird. They claim their suffering is more effective than the sacraments. They suggest that priests are unnecessary intermediaries. You can appeal directly to God through self-flagellation. This is borderline heresy. The Church does not like competition. Flagellants also start blaming specific groups for the plague. They whip up anti-Semitic fervour, accusing Jewish communities of poisoning wells. They lead pogroms. They execute people without trial. The movement becomes violent and uncontrollable. In 1349, Pope Clement VI officially condemns the flagellants and orders them to disband. Some do. Others ignore the Pope and continue their bloody processions. Eventually, authorities crack down, arresting flagellant leaders and executing them for heresy. The movement fades, but not before causing enormous harm. Back to the regular church services, which are supposed to provide comfort but often do the opposite. You attend Mass in a church that smells like death because it's being used to store corpses. The priest, if there is one, leads a service while coughing into his sleeve, clearly infected. You're packed into the pews with other terrified parishioners, all of you breathing the same air, passing communion wine from the same chalice. It's a disease vector, disguised as worship. You leave church feeling less comforted and more exposed. The Church also promotes specific saints as protectors against plague. Saint Sebastian, who was martyred by arrows, becomes associated with plague protection, possibly because plague symptoms look like being shot full of arrows. Saint Roch, who survived plague and dedicated his life to helping victims, becomes enormously popular. People pray to these saints, build shrines, make pilgrimages. Does it help? Medically? No. Psychologically? Maybe. It gives people a sense of control in a situation where they have none. Pilgrimages themselves are problematic. Travelling to a saint's shrine means walking through multiple plague-infested towns. You're exposing yourself to infection the entire journey. But people do it anyway because faith demands action. They believe that reaching the shrine and praying will save them. So they walk for days or weeks, sleeping in plague-ridden inns, drinking from contaminated wells, and interacting with other pilgrims who might be infected. Many pilgrims die en route. Their bodies are left on the roadside, adding to the general atmosphere of death that permeates Europe. The few who make it to the shrine pray fervently, then make the dangerous journey home if they still have a home to return to. The Church also sells indulgences more aggressively during the plague. An indulgence is essentially a receipt for forgiveness. You pay money, and the Church reduces your time in purgatory. Normally, indulgences are sold at a steady rate. During the plague, sales skyrocket. People are terrified of dying in sin, and indulgences seem like insurance. The Church is happy to provide them at premium prices. It's profiteering off fear, but that's not how the Church frames it. They call it spiritual commerce. You're buying your way into heaven. And what's more important than that? Some clergy genuinely try to help. There are priests who stay with their congregations, ministering to the sick and dying, despite the obvious danger. They hear confessions from plague victims, administer last rites, provide comfort in people's final moments. These priests often die themselves, martyrs to their faith and duty. They're the exceptions, not the rule, but they exist. History remembers them as saints, while forgetting the dozens who fled. The Church also runs hospitals, or what passes for hospitals, in medieval Europe. These are more like hospices, places where the sick go to die with some semblance of dignity. Monks and nuns staff these institutions, caring for patients despite minimal medical knowledge. They offer water, prayers, and a clean place to lie down. It's not much, but it's more than most plague victims get. The mortality rate in church-run hospitals during the plague approaches 100%, but that's true everywhere. At least the patients die with someone holding their hand. But here's where the Church's advice becomes darkly ironic. They're telling everyone to gather for Mass, confess in enclosed spaces, take communion from shared vessels, and attend public processions. All of these activities involve close contact with other people. They're perfect conditions for disease transmission. The Church is inadvertently spreading the plague while claiming to fight it. It's a negative feedback loop. More people die, so more people attend church to pray for protection, which exposes them to more infected people, which causes more deaths. Some forward-thinking clergy figure this out. A few bishops order churches to close temporarily, suspending public services to prevent contagion. This is controversial. How can you fight God's punishment by shutting down God's houses? But it's pragmatic. The churches that close see lower infection rates in their parishes. The churches that stay open become death traps. But most churches stay open because closing feels like admitting defeat, like abandoning the faithful in their darkest hour. The Church also has to deal with theological questions it's not equipped to answer. If this is God's punishment, why are the faithful dying alongside the sinful? Why are nuns and priests dying at high rates? Shouldn't piety provide protection? The pat answer is that God's ways are mysterious, that suffering purifies the soul, that this is a test of faith. But that answer rings hollow when you're watching children die, when entire convents are wiped out, when the most devout people you know are coughing up blood. Some people lose faith entirely. They look at the death toll, millions dead, no end in sight, and decide God doesn't exist, or doesn't care, or is cruel. This is heretical thinking, dangerous thinking, but it spreads anyway. You can't punish everyone for heresy when half the population is having doubts. The Church tries to suppress these ideas through preaching and intimidation, but you can't scare people who've already seen the worst thing imaginable. Other people become hyper-religious, convinced that they haven't prayed enough, haven't suffered enough, haven't proven their devotion. These are the people who join the flagellants, or lock themselves in monasteries, or give away all their possessions to the Church. They're trying to out-pious the plague, and it doesn't work, but they keep trying because the alternative is accepting meaninglessness. The Church also struggles with burial rites. Normally, there are elaborate procedures for dying, last confession, last rites, anointing with holy oil, prayers for the dead, consecrated burial in a churchyard. But during the plague, there are too many bodies and not enough priests. Last rites are rushed or skipped entirely. Bodies are buried without ceremony in mass graves that aren't consecrated. This is spiritually catastrophic for medieval people. Being buried improperly means your soul might not reach heaven. It might be stuck in purgatory or limbo forever. People die, terrified not just of death, but of improper death. Some priests try to perform mass blessings, standing at the edge of plague pits and blessing all the bodies at once. It's efficient, but impersonal. You're not getting individual attention from God's representative. You're getting a bulk blessing, like a spiritual Costco. It doesn't feel adequate, but it's all anyone can offer. The church's advice, pray harder, confess more, suffer willingly, is fundamentally useless against a bacterial infection. But medieval people don't know that. They're operating in a world where disease is spiritual, not biological. So they follow the church's guidance because it's the only guidance available. They pray until their knees are bruised. They confess sins they didn't commit just to be thorough. They donate their last coins to the church, hoping to buy God's favour. And when they die anyway, because of course they die anyway, their families are left wondering what they did wrong. Did they not pray hard enough? Was their faith insufficient? Did God simply not hear them? The church's explanation for failure is always the same. You didn't do enough. You didn't believe hard enough. You didn't suffer enough. It's victim blaming on a cosmic scale. The long-term effect of the plague on the church is significant. People start questioning religious authority. If the church's advice didn't stop the plague, what else are they wrong about? Seeds of skepticism are planted that will eventually grow into the Reformation. But that's centuries away. Right now, in 1347, the church is still the dominant institution, and its advice is still the only game in town. So you pray, you confess, you attend Mass despite the risk. You watch the flagellants whip themselves bloody and wonder if you should join them. You buy an indulgence you can't afford. You make promises to God, I'll be better, I'll sin less, I'll give more if He just spares you. And when the fever comes anyway, when the buboes swell and the pain becomes unbearable, you wonder if God is even listening. Spoiler, God is not listening, or if He is, He's not intervening. The bacteria don't care about your prayers. They don't care about your faith, or your piety, or your confessions. They just multiply and kill, indifferent to theology. The church's advice is sincere but ineffective, well-intentioned but harmful, comforting but ultimately useless. And that might be the cruelest part. You die believing you failed God, when really medieval medicine failed you. Death is everywhere. Your neighbour dies, then their kids, then the baker, then the blacksmith. Bodies pile up faster than anyone can bury them. You're expected to help cart corpses to mass graves, even though you're terrified of catching what they had. The graves are huge trenches filled with hundreds of bodies stacked like firewood. There's no ceremony, no prayers, just a pit, some lime, and a hope that God's keeping track of all this. Let's start with the first death on your street. Your neighbour, let's call him Thomas, has been sick for 3 days. You heard him coughing through the walls. You heard his wife crying. You heard the children asking when Papa would get better. Then, this morning, silence. The kind of silence that means something final has happened. A few hours later, Thomas's wife drags his body out to the street and waits for the plague cart. You watch from your doorway. You don't offer to help because touching a plague corpse is asking to become a plague corpse. Thomas's body is wrapped in the same blanket. He died in no coffin, no shroud, just wool. His face is visible, eyes half open, mouth slack. You knew Thomas. He borrowed tools from you. He helped you repair your roof last summer. Now he's a thing lying in the dirt, waiting to be collected like garbage. The cart comes around midday. The driver is a man named William who took the job because it pays well and because someone has to do it. He's seen hundreds of bodies by now, maybe thousands. He stopped reacting to them. He grabs Thomas by the shoulders, another man grabs the legs, and they heave him onto the cart. Thomas lands on top of 3 other corpses. His arm flops over the side. William doesn't adjust it. He just makes a mark on his parchment and moves on. Thomas's wife is sobbing. Their children are clinging to her skirt. You want to offer comfort, but you can't get too close. You shout from your doorway, "I'm sorry for your loss." It sounds inadequate because it is. She doesn't respond. She's watching the cart roll away. taking her husband to a mass grave somewhere outside town. She'll never visit his grave because there is no grave, not really. Just a trench with hundreds of other bodies. Thomas will decompose into the soil, indistinguishable from everyone else who died this week. 3 days later, Thomas's wife is dead, then one of the children, then the other. You watch the cart come back 3 more times. The family is gone, completely erased in a week. Their house stands empty now, door hanging open. You should probably go inside and see if there's anything useful, food, tools, blankets. But you don't, because the house reeks of death, and you're not that desperate yet. Someone else will loot it eventually. Maybe you. Maybe someone braver or hungrier. Now it's the baker's turn. He dies in the middle of the night, and his apprentice discovers the body in the morning when he comes to start the ovens. The apprentice runs into the street screaming that the baker is dead. This is bad news for everyone, because the baker was one of the few people still making bread. Now, there's one fewer source of food in a town that's already starving. The apprentice tries to keep the bakery running, but he doesn't know the baker's recipes. The bread he produces is terrible, dense, burnt, barely edible. People buy it anyway because it's bread. Within a week, the apprentice is dead too. The bakery closes. The ovens go cold. The blacksmith dies next. This is catastrophic, because the blacksmith repairs tools, shoes, horses, makes nails, essential services. His body is collected, his forge goes dark, and now nobody in town can fix a broken plough or shoe a horse. The knowledge dies with him. His sons might have learned the trade eventually, but his sons are dead too, the entire family gone. The forge will sit abandoned for years. You're keeping count, unconsciously. 5 houses on your street, 3 are empty now, the family's dead. 1 house is quarantined, there's a red cross painted on the door, warning people to stay away. That leaves your house and 1 other. You wonder which will be next. You wonder if you'll live long enough to see the entire street die. The bodies pile up faster than the cart can collect them. At first, the plague cart came once a day. Now it comes 3 times, sometimes 4, and it's still not enough. Bodies start accumulating in the street. They lie where they fell, or where their families dragged them, waiting for collection. The smell is overpowering, sweet and rotten and inescapable. You breathe through your mouth, but you can taste it. Death has a flavour, and it coats your tongue. Flies appear in biblical numbers. They swarm the corpses, laying eggs. Within a day, the bodies are crawling with maggots. You see them from your window white, writhing masses consuming the dead. It's nature's way of recycling, but it's horrifying to witness. The flies then spread through the town, landing on your food, your face, your children. They're carrying plague bacteria on their legs, spreading it further. Everything the flies touch becomes contaminated. The town officials realise they need a better system. The individual burials in the churchyard aren't sustainable. There's no room left, every plot is full, and they're burying people 2 or 3 deep. So they start digging plague pits outside town. Huge trenches, maybe 20 feet long, 10 feet wide, 10 feet deep. They're dug by whoever's still healthy enough to hold a shovel, and let me tell you, nobody wants this job. You're digging your own future grave, potentially. But you do it because the alternative is letting corpses rot in the streets. When a plague pit is ready, the bodies are brought by the cartload. You're conscripted to help. You and a dozen other men stand at the edge of the pit while the cart unloads. The bodies are thrown in, not placed, thrown. There's no time for dignity, no time for careful arrangement. They land in heaps, limbs tangled, faces pressed into the dirt. You recognise some of them. There's Margaret from the market. There's the priest who heard your last confession. There's a child you don't know. maybe 5 years old, clutching a wooden toy. You're supposed to arrange the bodies somewhat, make them fit more efficiently. This means climbing into the pit and physically moving corpses. You do it because you're ordered to, but also because you're too numb to refuse. You grab a woman's arm and drag her to the side. Her skin is cold and waxy. Her arm comes partially detached from her shoulder, and you nearly vomit, but you hold it together. You move another body, and another. You work until the pit is full, 50 bodies, maybe more. You've lost count. Then someone shovels lime over the bodies, quicklime, which helps with decomposition and reduces the smell. It coats the corpses in white powder, making them look ghostly. Then dirt is shoveled in, burying everything. The pit is filled and mounded. Within a week, it'll settle as the bodies decompose. Within a month, grass will start growing. Within a year, you won't be able to tell there's a mass grave here unless you know what to look for. There's no priest at the burial. All the priests are dead or overwhelmed. So there's no ceremony, no prayers, no last rites for these people. They're being buried like animals. Worse than animals, at least a dead horse gets dragged away from town before being left to rot. These are people, and they're being dumped in a hole. You stand at the edge of the pit after the burial is done, and you can't help but think, this will be me soon. I'll be in one of these pits, covered in lime, forgotten. The psychological toll is immense. You're handling corpses daily. You're surrounded by death. You go to sleep smelling death. You wake up smelling death. It permeates everything. Your clothes, your hair, your skin. You can't wash it off because there's no soap and barely any water. You exist in a miasma of decay. Some people break under the stress. There's a man named John who worked the plague cart for 2 weeks. On day 15, he snaps. He starts screaming that the bodies are moving, that they're trying to grab him. He runs into the forest and isn't seen again. Maybe he died out there. Maybe he just kept running. Nobody goes looking for him because nobody has the energy. You develop coping mechanisms. You stop seeing the bodies as people. They're just objects to be moved. You don't look at their faces. You don't think about who they were. You mechanically grab, drag, throw, bury. It's the only way to maintain sanity. But at night, when you try to sleep, the faces come back. You dream about the child with the toy. You dream about the woman whose arm came apart in your hands. You dream about the pit filling with bodies, and in the dream you fall in and can't climb out. The people who survive this work are changed. They're hollowed out, emotionally blank. They've seen too much death to process it normally. When someone asks, "How are you?" they don't know how to answer. Fine? Nothing is fine. Dead? Not yet. They exist in a liminal space between life and death, going through motions because stopping means thinking, and thinking means confronting the horror. And the worst part? The pits fill up. You dig one, fill it, and immediately start digging another. The death rate isn't slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating. You're running out of space to bury people. Some towns resort to burning bodies, which is faster but creates a different problem. The smell of burning flesh. It's sickening and distinctive. You smell it for miles. And it never stops. The pyres burn day and night, black smoke rising into the sky like a monument to failure. Your neighbour's house is still empty. The door swings in the wind. Sometimes you hear noises inside, rats probably, or the structure settling. It sounds like footsteps. It sounds like the dead coming back. You know that's impossible, but your rational mind has taken a back seat to primal fear. Everything creaks and groans and whispers. The entire town feels haunted. Eventually, if you survive, you'll look back on this time and wonder how you made it through, how you buried hundreds of people, how you climbed into pits and moved corpses, how you kept functioning when everything around you was death. There's no good answer, you just did. Because you had to, because the alternative was lying down and waiting for your turn on the cart. And some days, that alternative seems appealing. Let's talk about the smell. You think medieval Europe smells bad normally? During the plague, it's unholy. There are rotting bodies in the streets. The air reeks of death, disease, and human waste. People are burning herbs and flowers to ward off the bad air, which just adds a layer of weird incense to the stench. It's like someone tried to cover up a landfill with a Yankee candle and failed spectacularly. You can't escape it. It's in your clothes, your hair, your nightmares. Let's be clear about something. Medieval towns already smell terrible. There's no sewage system. People throw their waste into the streets. Animals defecate freely. Butchers dump offal into gutters. Tanners cure leather using urine and feces, creating a smell so foul that tanneries are legally required to be located downwind of towns. The air is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, rotting food, animal waste, and industrial processes that would violate every modern environmental regulation. You're nose-blind to most of it because you've lived with it your entire life. It's just the background smell of existence. Then the plague arrives, and suddenly there's a new smell, a worse smell. A smell that cuts through everything else and announces itself. Death. Not the quick death of a butchered animal. The slow, rotting death of human bodies, decomposing in the summer heat. It's sweet and putrid simultaneously, with notes of decay that trigger something primal in your brain. Your body knows this smell means danger, knows it means disease and corruption. But you can't escape it, so you just have to live with the constant low-level panic it induces. The bodies in the streets are the primary source. They're waiting for collection, sometimes for days. In summer, decomposition accelerates. Within hours, a corpse begins to bloat as bacteria in the gut produce gas. The skin discolors green, then purple-black. Fluids leak from orifices, mouth, nose, ears, other places. These fluids pool underneath the body, soaking into the dirt street, creating dark stains that attract flies and rats. The smell intensifies hourly. By day 2, the body has swollen to nearly twice its normal size. The skin sometimes splits, releasing even more gas and fluid. By day 3, if the body still hasn't been collected, it's actively falling apart. You walk past these bodies daily. There's no other route. The streets are narrow, and the bodies are everywhere. You hold your breath, but you can only hold it for so long. Eventually, you have to inhale, and when you do, the smell fills your lungs. It coats your throat. You can taste it, yes, taste it, a thick, meaty flavour that makes you gag. Some people vomit from the smell alone, adding fresh vomit to the general stench of the streets, which then ferments in the heat. You're living in an olfactory nightmare. Inside houses where people have died, the smell is concentrated and inescapable. The deceased has been lying on a straw mattress for days, decomposing. The straw absorbs the fluids. The room becomes a biohazard. When the family finally opens the door to drag the body out, a wave of smell hits you from 20 feet away. It's so strong, it has physical presence. It makes your eyes water. It makes you gag, reflexively. The neighbours smell it through the walls. They complain, but what can anyone do? Everyone's house smells like death, or soon will. The plague pits those mass graves we discussed earlier generate their own special aroma. Dozens of bodies, in various states of decay, covered with a thin layer of lime and dirt. The lime helps, but it doesn't eliminate the smell. It just adds a chemical tang to the sweetness of rot. During summer, the pits produce visible gas, methane, and other byproducts of decomposition. Sometimes the gas ignites spontaneously, creating eerie flames that flicker over the graves at night. People think it's supernatural. It's not. It's just chemistry. But it looks like hell, and it smells worse. The churches are particularly bad. They're being used to store bodies because the graveyards are full. Corpses are stacked inside in the aisles, in side chapels, sometimes right up near the altar. The church is supposed to be a sacred space, but it's been converted into a morgue. When you attend Mass, if you still attend Mass, you're surrounded by dead bodies. The smell of incense, which priests burn liberally, mingles with the smell of decay. It creates this bizarre olfactory combination, floral and putrid, holy and horrifying. You're trying to pray while breathing through your mouth, fighting the urge to vomit on the church floor. Let's talk about the living, who also smell terrible. Nobody's bathing. Water is scarce and needed for drinking and cooking, not washing. You haven't changed clothes in weeks. Your tunic is stiff, with dried sweat, blood from burst buboes, vomit, and other fluids we won't detail. Lice are crawling through your hair and clothes, and lice have their own distinct smell, musty and sharp. Everyone smells like this. When you stand close to someone, the combined body odour is overwhelming. But you're all equally filthy, so nobody comments on it. The sick smell different from the healthy. Plague victims emit a particular odour-fevered sweat mixed with the sweetness of infection, the metallic tang of blood, the foulness of gangrenous tissue. You can smell plague on someone before you see the symptoms. It's your early warning system. When you catch a whiff of that smell, you know to back away. Too late. Probably you've already been exposed, but instinct makes you retreat anyway. Human waste is everywhere and nowhere to go. The chamber pots are overflowing because nobody has the energy to empty them properly. So people just toss the contents out the window or dump them in the street. Feces, urine, and menstrual blood create rivers of filth that flow down the slight incline of medieval streets. These rivers stagnate in low spots, creating pools of sewage that bake in the sun. The smell is indescribable. It's ammonia and rot and things that should never be exposed to open air. Flies breed in these pools. Disease spreads from these pools. But what can you do? Everyone's too sick or too busy caring for the sick to maintain even basic sanitation. The animals contribute their share. Dead livestock, cows, pigs, chickens, lie where they fell. Nobody has time to butcher or bury them. They rot in barns, in streets, in fields. Rats are everywhere, and rats smell musty and sharp, especially in large numbers. Their nests, built in your walls and under your floors, reek of concentrated rodent musk. When a rat dies inside your wall, you can't retrieve the body. You just have to live with the smell as it decomposes. It takes weeks for a rat corpse to fully dry out. Weeks of that sickly sweet small animal death smell permeating your home. People try to combat the smell with what they have. They burn fragrant woods, juniper, pine, cedar in their fireplaces. The smoke helps a little, adds a pleasant burning wood scent to the mix. But it doesn't cover the death smell. It just creates layers. Death on the bottom, wood smoke on top, with hints of human waste and animal decay in the middle. It's like a sommelier's description of the world's worst wine. The wealthy, those who haven't fled, carry pomanders, small perforated metal balls filled with aromatic substances, cloves, cinnamon, dried roses, sometimes ambergris if they're very wealthy. They hold these under their noses when walking through town, creating a bubble of pleasant scent. Does it work? Sure, in the sense that they're smelling cloves instead of corpses. But the death smell seeps through eventually, and pomanders are expensive. Peasants can't afford them. Peasants just suffer. Vinegar-soaked rags are another solution. You tie a rag around your face, covering nose and mouth, and breathe through it. The vinegar smell is sharp and acidic, cutting through other odours. It's the medieval version of a gas mask. Except it's not a mask, it's a rag, and it doesn't protect you from anything except having to fully experience the smell. The vinegar evaporates within an hour, and then you're just breathing through a dirty rag. But you keep it on because psychologically it helps. You feel like you're doing something. Some people stuff herbs up their nostrils, literally shove lavender or mint into their nose holes. This seems insane, and it kind of is, but it's effective at blocking smells. The problem is you can barely breathe, and the herbs make your nose itch, and you look ridiculous walking around with vegetation sticking out of your face. But vanity is low on your priority list when you're trying not to vomit from the stench of your dying neighbour. At night, the smell is somehow worse. The air is still. There's no wind to disperse the odours. Everything settles and concentrates. You lie in bed trying to sleep, and the smell presses down on you like a physical weight. You dream about clean air. You dream about the countryside before the plague, when the worst thing you smelled was cow manure, which now seems quaint and wholesome in comparison. You wake up gasping, and the smell is still there. It's always there. Your sense of smell becomes both more acute and more numb. You notice subtle differences. This corpse is 2 days old versus 3 days old. This person has bubonic plague versus pneumonic plague. But you're also desensitized. Smells that would have made you vomit a month ago now barely register. You've adapted. Your brain has learned to filter out the constant assault of terrible odours, because if it didn't, you'd be vomiting constantly and unable to function. It's a survival mechanism, but it costs you something. You'll never smell things the same way again. The rain, when it comes, doesn't help as much as you'd hope. It washes some of the filth from the streets, true, but it also creates mud that traps decomposing matter, bits of flesh, feces, rotting food, and turns the streets into soup, plague soup. You walk through it barefoot because your shoes fell apart weeks ago, and the mud squelches between your toes. It's warm and thick, and you know what's in it, but you try not to think about it. The rain also makes the bodies decompose faster, releasing more smell. So rain is a mixed blessing at best. If you survive the plague, the smell memories will haunt you forever. Years later, you'll catch a whiff of something, maybe a dead animal, maybe spoiled meat, and you'll be transported back to 1347. The memories will hit you like a physical blow. You'll remember the corpse-lined streets, the plague pits, the churches full of bodies. You'll remember what death smells like in bulk, and you'll realise that no matter how much time passes, you'll never fully escape that smell. It's embedded in your brain, a permanent scar from the worst time in your life. But that's if you survive. Most people don't. They die while surrounded by the smell, their last breaths filled with the stench of their own decay and everyone else's. There's no fresh air, no moment of olfactory peace. Just smell, overwhelming and inescapable, from first symptom to final breath. And that, somehow, seems like the cruelest detail of all. Some people try to flee the plague by leaving town. Makes sense, right? Wrong. Because wherever you go, the plague follows. It's on the trade routes. It's in the ports. It's hitching a ride on every flea-infested rat in Europe. Cities close their gates. Villages turn away strangers. If you show up somewhere new with a cough, they'll stone you. Running from the plague is like trying to outrun your own shadow. You can try, but it's coming with you. The impulse to flee is understandable. You watch your neighbours die. You see the bodies piling up. You think, if I just get away from here, I'll be safe. Fresh air, clean water, maybe a place the plague hasn't reached yet. It's logical. It's also usually futile, but you don't know that yet. So you pack whatever you can. carry some food, a blanket, maybe a few coins if you have any, and you leave. You walk out of town in the early morning, before anyone can stop you, heading toward anywhere that isn't here. The first problem, you might already be infected. The incubation period for plague is 3 to 7 days. You could have been bitten by an infected flea yesterday, and you feel fine right now, so you think you're healthy. You walk for 3 days, arrive at a new village, and then the fever starts. Congratulations. You've just imported the plague to a community that was plague-free. You're patient zero in a new outbreak. The villagers figure this out quickly when you start developing buboes, and they are not happy about it. Some villages execute plague carriers on the spot. Others just beat them and drive them back out. Either way, you're not welcome. The second problem, everyone else has the same idea. The roads are clogged with refugees fleeing plague-stricken areas. You're travelling in a crowd, which means close contact with potentially infected people. You're sharing water sources. You're sleeping in the same barns and ditches. Someone in the group is almost certainly incubating plague, and now you're all breathing the same air, touching the same surfaces, drinking from the same streams. It's the perfect disease transmission environment. You left town to escape the plague and ended up in a mobile plague vector. Cities see this coming and close their gates. If you approach a city like Florence or Milan or Paris, you'll find the gates barred and guards on the walls. They're not letting anyone in, not merchants, not travellers, not refugees. Doesn't matter if you're healthy. Doesn't matter if you're wealthy and willing to pay. The gates are closed, period. Some cities post signs. No entry under penalty of death. They mean it. Approach too closely and they'll shoot arrows at you. You're a threat, and threats get eliminated. Smaller villages handle refugees differently. They don't have walls, so they can't physically bar entry. Instead, they post guards on the roads leading into town. When you approach, the guards stop you with spears or farm tools weaponized for the occasion. Turn back, they say. We don't want your plague. You try to explain that you're healthy, that you're just looking for safety. They don't care. They've heard stories about travellers bringing plague. They're not taking chances. If you refuse to leave, they'll escalate. Maybe they'll beat you. Maybe they'll kill you. Depends how desperate they are. Let's say you make it past the guards somehow. Maybe you sneak in at night. Maybe you bribe someone. Maybe you find a village desperate enough for labour that they'll take the risk. You settle in, thinking you've escaped. For a few days, maybe a few weeks, everything seems fine. Then someone in the village develops a fever. Then someone else. The plague has arrived, and everyone knows you brought it. They turn on you immediately. You're dragged from your shelter and accused of being a plague spreader. Some villages hold a quick trial. Others skip straight to execution. You try to run, but where are you going to go? Back to the first town, which is still plague-ridden, further away, to another village that will also reject you? The wealthy have more options. They own country estates outside the city's rural manors, where they can isolate. When the plague hits Florence, the rich pack up their households and flee to the countryside. They bring servants, food supplies, wine, everything they need to wait out the plague in comfort. Boccaccio's Decameron is literally about rich Florentines doing this, sitting around in a country villa telling stories while the plague ravages the city. It's a viable strategy if you can afford it. But even the wealthy aren't safe. They bring the plague with them sometimes, hiding in their luggage or on their servants. Or they successfully isolate, only to have the plague arrive in the countryside months later. Or they run out of supplies and have to send servants into plague-infested towns to buy food, and the servants bring the plague back. Isolation only works if it's perfect, and perfect isolation is nearly impossible in medieval Europe. Everything is connected: trade routes, travellers, rats. The plague finds you eventually. The roads themselves are dangerous. You're travelling through countryside that's also experiencing plague. Dead bodies lie in ditches. Abandoned villages dot the landscape, everyone either dead or fled. You need food and water, but where do you get them? Do you enter an empty house and take what you find, knowing the owners probably died of plague? Do you drink from a stream that might be contaminated with plague runoff? Every decision is a gamble, with death as the stakes. Bandits are another problem. With law and order collapsing, criminals are emboldened. They know refugees carry whatever valuables they manage to grab before fleeing. You're walking alone or in a small group, vulnerable, and you look like an easy target. Bandits stop you on the road, demand your belongings. If you resist, they kill you. If you comply, they take everything and leave you to starve. Some bandits are just desperate people trying to survive. Others are career criminals exploiting the chaos. Either way, you're getting robbed. Then there's the weather. Let's say you're fleeing in autumn or winter. You're walking for days, sleeping outdoors because there's no shelter. You're cold, wet, exhausted. You don't have adequate clothing because you fled with whatever you were wearing. Hypothermia is a real risk. So is starvation. You ran out of food days ago, and there's nothing to forage in winter. You're weak, which makes you more susceptible to disease. You might escape the plague only to die of exposure or starvation. The plague doesn't have to kill you directly if it creates conditions where death is inevitable. Some people flee by sea, which seems smarter. Get on a ship, sail to an island or a different country. The problem, ships are plague vectors too. Rats live on ships. Every ship has rats. Fleas live on the rats. One infected rat on your ship, and everyone aboard is exposed. Ships become floating death traps. Entire crews die mid-voyage. The ship drifts, unmanned, a ghost ship full of corpses. Other ships encounter these ghost ships and, not knowing what happened, board them to salvage cargo. They find the bodies, contract the plague, and become the next ghost ship. It's a nautical nightmare. Port cities are especially dangerous. Ships arrive from plague-infested regions carrying infected passengers or crew. The ports try to implement quarantine measures. Ships have to anchor offshore for 40 days, quarantagioni in Italian, which is where we get the word quarantine. If nobody on board dies in 40 days, the ship can dock, but 40 days is a long time. Food and water run out. People start dying from malnutrition or other diseases. The quarantine period just becomes a slow death sentence for everyone aboard. If you're fleeing over land and you reach a border, say, between France and Spain, you might find it closed. Countries don't want plague spreading across borders, so they shut down crossings. Guards turn back travellers. You're stuck in plague-ridden France with no way to reach Spain, or vice versa. Political boundaries become death sentences. You're trapped in the worst possible place because someone drew a line on a map centuries ago. Religious pilgrims are still travelling, plague or no plague. They're going to shrines, fulfilling vows, seeking divine intervention. They believe their faith will protect them. It doesn't. Pilgrims become super spreaders, visiting multiple towns and cities, staying in crowded hostels, attending packed religious services. They pick up the plague in one location and deliver it to the next. The pilgrimage routes Santiago de Compostela, Canterbury, Rome become plague highways. Death follows the faithful, which seems like a cosmic joke. Let's say you successfully flee and find a safe place. You're in a remote village that the plague hasn't reached. You settle in. You start to relax. Then, 6 months later, a merchant arrives with goods to trade. He seems healthy. He's not. Within 2 weeks, the village is infected. You fled hundreds of miles, survived bandits and exposure and starvation, found safety, and then the plague found you anyway. Because you can't outrun a pandemic. You can only delay the inevitable. The psychological toll of fleeing is immense. You've abandoned your home, your community, everything familiar. You're a refugee in your own country, unwelcome everywhere, treated with suspicion and hostility. You don't know if the family members you left behind are alive or dead. Probably dead, but you'll never know for sure. The guilt is crushing. You saved yourself by leaving them. Was it worth it? Are you a survivor or a coward? Both? Neither? And here's the darkest irony. Staying put might have been safer. By fleeing, you exposed yourself to infected travellers, contaminated water sources, and dangerous roads. You might have survived longer by locking yourself in your house and not opening the door for anyone. But you couldn't have known that. You made the logical choice, flee danger, and it didn't work. The plague doesn't care about logic. If you survive your flight, and that's a big if, you'll eventually have to stop running. You'll find some place that will tolerate your presence, or you'll just collapse from exhaustion and stay wherever you fall. You'll try to rebuild a life from nothing. And you'll always wonder, what was the point? I ran, and the plague followed. I lost everything, and I gained nothing but a few more months of life. Was that worth it? The answer, by the way, is yes. Those few extra months are everything when you're facing death. Every day you survive is a victory, even if it's a temporary one. Even if the plague eventually gets you anyway. You fought, you tried, you ran, even though running was probably futile. That's what humans do. We don't go gentle into that good night. We rage, we flee, we cling to hope even when hope is irrational. But damn, it would be nice if fleeing actually worked. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep in your clean bed with your indoor plumbing and your antibiotics within arm's reach, take a moment to whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors, the ones who survived lice, leeches and soup that might actually kill you, the ones who buried half their villages and kept going, the ones who watched everyone they loved die and somehow found the strength to rebuild. Because here's the thing about the Black Death. It was absolutely, catastrophically, nightmare-inducingly terrible. It killed between 75 and 200 million people. It wiped out entire bloodlines. It turned Europe into a graveyard dotted with ghost towns and mass graves. It traumatized generations so deeply that the scars are still visible in art, literature, and collective memory 6 centuries later. But here's the other thing. We survived it. They planted fields, even though they might not live to harvest them. They fell in love, even though their partners might die tomorrow. They had children, even though those children had a coin flip chance of reaching adulthood. They rebuilt villages, reopened markets, performed weddings, celebrated festivals. They chose life, even when death surrounded them. The plague taught us that humans are fragile. Our bodies are vulnerable to invisible threats. Our societies can collapse faster than we imagine. Our certainties can be shattered in months. Death is always closer than we think. But it also taught us that humans are resilient. We endure catastrophic loss. We rebuild from ruins. We adapt to new realities. We persist, even when persistence seems impossible. We're tougher than we look, more stubborn than we should be, and more hopeful than circumstances warrant. The medieval peasant who survived the Black Death and your modern self have something in common. You're both trying to live in an uncertain world. They didn't know if plague would return next year. You don't know what challenges you'll face tomorrow. They lived with fear and kept going anyway. You do the same. So as you lie there in the dark, comfortable and safe, and probably scrolling your phone when you should be sleeping, remember, the world used to be much, much worse. Your bed used to be a pile of straw crawling with fleas. Your water came from a well that might have a dead body in it. Your doctor's best treatment was making you bleed into a bowl. Your life expectancy was maybe 40 if you were incredibly lucky. Now look around. You've got heating, cooling, light at the touch of a switch, food that won't kill you, medicine that actually works, a reasonable expectation that you and the people you love will survive the night. These aren't small things. They're miracles that your ancestors literally died wishing for. The Black Death was humanity's worst pandemic, but it wasn't our last crisis. There have been others. There will be more. That's the nature of existence. Challenges keep coming, and we keep facing them. Sometimes we fail. Often we struggle, but we survive. We learn. We improve. We build better systems and develop better knowledge and create safer worlds for the next generation. The plague survivors didn't have therapy or support groups or any way to process their trauma. They just carried it. They lived with nightmares and survivor's guilt and grief that never fully healed. They did that so their children could have slightly better lives, who did the same for their children, who did the same for theirs, down through generations until we get to you. You are the descendant of survivors, of people tough enough to endure the worst pandemic in human history and still choose to continue. That resilience is in your DNA, literally and figuratively. When you face challenges, when things seem hopeless, when the world feels overwhelming, remember that your ancestors faced worse, much worse, and they made it through. Not easily, not without cost, not without scars that lasted generations, but they made it, and because they made it, you're here. So tonight, as sleep finally takes you, let go of the plague carts and the buboes and the mass graves. Let go of the trauma and the horror and the overwhelming sadness of millions of unnecessary deaths. Those stories aren't meant to give you nightmares, though they might. Sorry about that. They're meant to give you perspective. Your problems are real and valid and sometimes overwhelming, but they're probably not watching half your village die of plague overwhelming. You have resources and knowledge and support systems that medieval people couldn't imagine. You have options they didn't have. You have hope grounded in actual, achievable solutions rather than desperate prayers to saints who may or may not exist. And that's beautiful in a weird, dark, historically traumatic sort of way. Good night. Sleep well. And maybe say a little thank you to the stubborn ancestors who survived impossible odds so you could exist. They earned it.